As the procession passes by, there are outbursts of emotion, but mostly a hush falls over the crowd, everyone consumed by this extraordinary yet tragic piece of history.
The press and the broadcasting apparatus, fully conscious of its sovereign role, turned itself into a megaphone, an echo chamber, a feedback loop, a machinery for positive reinforcement. And the more coverage it supplied, the less its critical faculties were engaged. More meant worse, and more meant less. At least part of this explanation has to do with media coverage, with a cowardly attempt to preempt an anti-media campaign disguised as populism. This is a motive somewhat less than compassionate. As a result, all the mourners were reported as not they, but we, not them, but us. Even by trying to make distinctions and discriminations between different types of grief, authenticity and spontaneity, we are at least attempting the task that our mass media so signally failed to perform or even to attempt.
People are expressing their grief right across the country. It's now just an hour before the funeral cortege sets off.
People seem reluctant to go straight home.
So why and how did the media choose to become a monotone voice for this so-called national mood? Venturing east into the pastures of Essex, I made my way to meet Simon Heffer, a Conservative pundit for the Daily Mail, who, having previously written about the princess in a rather disobliging way, was told to take that week off, the better to clear further space for eulogy. My dear Mr. Heffer, I think. Good to see you. Very nice of you to have me.
I had written some very hostile pieces about the Princess of Wales before she died, and it was deemed, and I'm sure it was commercially the right idea, that my views should be kept in their place, which was not in the paper for that time.
How would you rate the performance of our great profession in this?
Many hacks would now cite the Nuremberg defense and say, I was only obeying orders. They wrote things that, looking back on them a year later in their yellow ink cuttings books, they will not be very proud of. I think the order that went out that week on all newspapers, more or less, was that the Princess of Wales was a very popular figure, that in her sudden and tragic death she had been elevated to a posthumous popularity not seen, I suppose, by anybody in this country, in the history of this country. And therefore any newspaper that wished to retain circulation had to be pretty nice about her. And reality was suspended. And so many hacks who wrote about this had no choice but to write about her in a very reverential way. I think, to an extent, the event in history that preceded this was the Hillsborough disaster. And we remember that when the Sun newspaper famously said that the Hillsborough disaster had been caused by a bunch of drunken Liverpool supporters fighting their way into the ground, its sales slumped, and it had to issue a grovelling apology before a lot of newsagents would stock it again in the Liverpool area. And I think that created a great fear of public opinion.
Do you believe that the loss of the Princess of Wales was a gain for the lasting credibility of monarchy or diminishment of it?
I believe that the royal family's chances of survival intact for another generation were greatly improved by the death of the Princess of Wales. Because I think the longer she had stayed around, the more of a liability she was going to become to them. I think that if she had married into the Fayed family, our royal family would have become a laughingstock very, very quickly. And it would have been a blow from which it would have been very hard for it to recover.
There were a few in the media who didn't agree to suspend reality. They were made to pay a price. In Soho, I called on my old friend Francis Wheen, whose columns are a regular antidote to whatever tripe happens to be flavour of the month, and who also helps to put out Private Eye, a resolutely bullshit-free magazine which was withdrawn by newsagents during Diana Week.
Readers were ringing in saying, we can't get it, it's been taken off sale at W.H. Smith. So we got on to the chief news buyer, and she said, yes, I think this issue ought to be banned. We have a policy of not selling any newspapers or magazines which include the crashed Mercedes. And we said, well, we haven't got it. And she said, yes, you have, on the cover. We said, no, there's a picture of Buckingham Palace with a crowd outside. And she said, yes, but in the bubbles, it mentions the crashed car. They're saying the paper's a disgrace. Yes, I couldn't get one either. Borrow mine, it's got a picture of the car. And on the strength of that, we were said to be bannable, and it took us about a week to get it back on sale at some of them. This was the state of mania that had taken over the news trade and possibly a large part of the nation. And since then, the sales have gone up and up. People felt, oh, well, I think I might start buying this magazine. It's the only one that hasn't lost its marbles.
Can you give us an idea of the sort of material you were publishing?
I put together a resume of the Mourning papers, Mourning with a U in, because already by Monday there was plenty to go on. I think my favourite one was Linda Lee Potter, who, the week before the death, 27th of August, had written in the Daily Mail, the sight of a paunchy playboy groping scantily dressed Diana must appall and humiliate Prince William. As a mother of 2 young sons, she ought to have more decorum and sense. And then, lo and behold, the day after the death, Linda Lee Potter, Daily Mail, throughout their childhood, she gave her sons endless loving cuddles. She adored her children. But there's an awful lot of it. I mean, even by Monday, Candles in the Wind were making an appearance. That moving number, Candle in the Wind. Except it's about England's Rose, but she was a rose. And yet, somehow, it seems to me, you lived your life like a candle in the wind, never fading with the sunset, as candles so often do, when the rain set in. So you have this candle, and it's been blown by the wind, and sunset comes, but it doesn't fade, even though the rain has set in. Rain always arrives at sunset, apparently. And your footsteps will always carry over England's greenest hills. The candle burned out long before. It's some gibberish, isn't it?
It's doggerel, yes.
But it's
national disgrace.
But it was it moved a lot of people, apparently, this walking candle striding across the hills.
In the form of a rose.
At sunset. In the rain.
Rain-sodden.
Sounds like MacArthur Park.
It's much worse than MacArthur Park.
Hearing Elton John, we were just crying. People just were uncontrollable listening to the words. The words were so appropriate for her.
Paul Johnson in the Daily Mail wrote an extraordinary piece saying there are now 2 Britons, the new Britain of Diana and Tony Blair, the caring, loving, kind, gentle Britain, and there is decadent Britain of a few modern artists and limp-wristed Nancy boys and this sort of thing who are trying to revive the Oscar Wilde tradition. Was it overlooking the fact that the person who sang Candle in the Wind at her funeral was himself a bit of a nance, and I think it's quite good to have a football punch-up now to get to remind us that we're not quite like that.
The image of Diana as the caring princess who worked incessantly for charities and who, by her good works and her very public emotional struggles, won the hearts of the British people, has rarely been challenged.
Those who did challenge that memory of Diana found themselves facing not only censorship but also physical abuse. Mark Thomas, a man who's proud to say that he does gags for money, was warned that week that a Diana joke was no laughing matter.
To talk about Diana on the week that she died was to invite physical threat. Just the mention would immediately, divide an audience.
Did anyone try and shut you up?
There were comics who had censorship directly imposed upon them by the club owners. There's a chain of clubs run by jongleurs, and they phoned up the performers and said, we've had people who are coming to the shows who've booked saying they won't come if there are going to be jokes about Diana, so would you please not do any?
They already know it's not funny.
Yeah, no, that's right. There's no, we don't want it. I will not laugh, and I'll walk out and I'll ask for my money back. And that was direct censorship.
Can you think of any other time that's happened?
No. It was almost like a Soviet leader had died, and that they'd put on the martial music, except it was like images of Diana and her children. I was talking to a friend and said it had the logic of a Disney production and the enforcement of a Nazi state. And it was like Disney meets the black shirts. It's kind of like sentimental. You must cry.
You will cry.
Yes. I love sort of like the idea of disrupting these events. And one of the things that I just remember that. That's how I started the thing, is about saying Princess Diana, I really wanted to go along to the funeral because I wanted to be the one to start the Mexican wave. Because people were actually in a state where they didn't know how to express mourning, and so they'd get a teddy, masses of teddies and flowers.
And delivered to the dead person, too.
Yes, which was remarkable, absolutely incredible. I wonder if she got them all. And so because people didn't know how to express mourning, I'm sure if you actually started the Mexican wave, some people would have joined in. So I remember people saying she was a saint because she dealt with people who were HIV, and she worked with landmine victims, and she did a lot of work for charity. And my point was very simple, which is if you are a millionairess with nothing to do all day except contemplate throwing up your lunch, you might go out and think, fuck it, touch a leper. Good PR. You know, the whole thing about comedy is that you say things which are beyond the pale, that you say things which you're not allowed to say, to go over the line, and to have freedom of speech. That is the whole point and purpose of it. So when you draw the line up and say, here is the line, you may not cross it, I think it's dreadful. If you're a comic and someone says, here is the line, do not go over it, you should gleefully bolt for it.